Every night, he's gone. And every night, something strange happens in this house that I can't explain. My dog, my big, loyal boy, he doesn't just bark or curl up and sleep like he usually does. No. He waits. He sits by the hallway, his ears twitching, eyes locked on the front door, like he's expecting someone, or maybe guarding against someone. And it's not just the usual alertness. There's an intensity in him now, a kind of knowing. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself I was imagining things. I mean, my husband is rarely here, and maybe my mind was just spinning lonely thoughts into shadows. But then I started noticing the details, the way he growls softly when a car drives by but stiffens at the quietest sound in the house. The way he nudges the door as if urging me to come see something I can't. And the look in his eyes, God, that look, like he knows more than I do. I hated admitting it, but a part of me already feared the truth. You know that gnawing feeling in your gut, the one that keeps you awake at night when the house is too quiet and every creak sounds like a warning? That's what it feels like, every single night. And the worst part? It's not just the dog that has changed. I feel it too, that tension in the air. That sense that something is happening when I'm not looking. And maybe that's why he's watching, waiting, guarding, or warning. Because something in this house, something in my life, isn't right. I want you to stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you, you're going to feel it in your bones. This isn't just about a dog. It's about trust, betrayal, and the ugly, invisible things that happen when someone you love starts slipping away without you noticing. So, if you're ready, subscribe to Stories by TE. You won't want to miss a single moment of what's coming next. I promise, it's going to stay with you long after the video ends. Ever since that first night I noticed him, my dog, acting different, I couldn't stop watching. I mean, I'd lived in this house for years, and I thought I knew every inch of it. The walls, the furniture, the creaks in the floorboards, everything. But somehow, every night, the same place started to feel stranger. Shadows seemed longer, quieter than usual. The dim glow of the hallway light looked almost accusing, and the air, there was this heaviness I couldn't shake. My husband, of course, didn't notice any of it. He was always so busy, late nights at work, early mornings out the door. I'd see him for a few hours, maybe a quiet dinner, a forced conversation about bills or chores, and then he'd be gone again. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't unkind. He just wasn't there. Not really. And I had learned, over the years, that his mind wandered somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't allowed to follow. And me? I was here. Alone. Trying to fill the hours with meaningless routines, waiting for the sound of his car to signal the end of the day. But the more he disappeared into his own world, the more I noticed things, small things at first. My dog, Max, would pace near the front door. He'd sniff the floor obsessively in the hallway. Sometimes, he'd let out a low growl that made my skin crawl, and when I called him, he'd just look at me with this intense stare, like he was trying to tell me something I couldn't yet understand. At first, I laughed it off. It's just a dog, I'd tell myself. Dogs are weird sometimes. But then there were nights when I'd sit on the couch, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator, and I'd feel Max's eyes on me, burning with this strange, restless energy. I'd glance at the hallway, shadows stretching across the walls, and my heart would catch in my throat. Something was off. Something was happening when my husband wasn't here, and Max knew it. The house itself seemed to hold its breath on those nights. The living room smelled faintly of perfume, my husband's cologne, sure, but also, something else, something I couldn't place. The floors creaked under my own weight, though I was the only one moving. The dim lights threw odd shapes across the walls, and every time I passed the hallway mirror, I caught the reflection of someone, or something, standing just behind me. But when I turned, there was nothing. Just the empty hallway and Max, sitting like a sentinel, alert, impossibly still. Max had always been my companion, my protector, but now, he felt like a warning. Like he knew things I didn't. I'd never seen him behave this way before, not ever. And yet, there was a part of me that didn't want to question it. A part of me that wanted to pretend the house was safe, that my marriage was fine, that I wasn't lonely in a way that gnawed at my chest like a persistent ache. And the nights, they started to blur together. Dim lights, quiet halls, shadows that seemed to move on their own, Max watching. Waiting. I began to notice the small details, the faint scent of perfume on the pillow he never slept on, the way the bed seemed slightly pressed in places that didn't make sense. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something in my marriage, something in this house, and maybe Max was trying to show me. Every time my husband left for work, or for one of his late nights, I felt my chest tighten. The air grew heavier, the silence louder. And Max, he would position himself strategically, sometimes in the hallway, sometimes near the bedroom door, his gaze sharp, unwavering. Watching. Waiting. And with each passing night, that feeling in the pit of my stomach grew stronger. There was a secret in this house. A secret that my husband carried with him, and a secret that Max, somehow, could see. And that's when I realized, maybe the only one really noticing, really seeing what was happening, wasn't me. It wasn't my husband. It was Max. It started on a Tuesday night. My husband had left for work later than usual, and I was sprawled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, trying to drown out the quiet that had grown too heavy. Max was at my feet at first, his head resting lazily on my lap. But as soon as I heard the click of the front door shutting behind him, he bolted upright. I froze. The house felt different somehow. The familiar silence was heavier, almost expectant. Max's ears twitched as he sniffed the air, and then, without a sound, he darted toward the hallway, stopping abruptly in front of the guest bedroom. I didn't have a guest staying over. Nobody was supposed to be in that room. Yet Max wouldn't move. His body was tense, rigid, tail low but swishing slowly, eyes locked on the door. "Max, what is it, boy?" I whispered, my voice barely carrying in the quiet. He didn't respond, not in the usual way. No whine, no bark, no pawing at my hand. Just that intense stare. And something about it made my stomach twist. I hesitated, the familiar fear creeping in. I'm imagining this, I told myself. It's just the silence. It's just me being paranoid. But deep down, I knew it wasn't paranoia. There was a weight in the air, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to appear. I tiptoed down the hallway, eyes fixed on Max. He moved a few steps ahead, then stopped again, growling softly. That low rumble wasn't directed at me. I could feel it. Something, or someone, was in that room. My heart pounded. The rational part of me said it was impossible. The logical explanation whispered that it could be a creaky floorboard, a shadow, maybe a bird outside. But Max, he was never wrong. I reached the door and hesitated. My hand hovered over the knob. I could hear my own breath, quick and shallow, and in the back of my mind, I felt that icy sliver of dread, the kind that tells you, right before the truth hits, that nothing will ever be the same. Then it happened. A soft shuffle from inside the room. A sound that didn't belong. Not the wind, not the pipes. Something deliberate. And Max, he bared his teeth, his growl deepening, low and threatening. I felt my hands tremble. My chest tightened. I wanted to turn away, to leave it alone, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But I couldn't. I leaned closer to the door, straining to listen. And in that instant, my mind raced. Could someone else be in the house? Someone he shouldn't be seeing? Could it be her? The thought made my stomach knot. My mind flashed to all those nights he came home late, excuses rolling off his tongue, soft smiles that didn't reach his eyes. And Max knew. I could feel it in every fiber of the dog's body, the way he was fixed on that door, refusing to move. I backed up, my heart hammering. The room was still, but the tension was alive, thick, and suffocating. I sank back onto the couch, trying to calm my shaking hands. Max sat beside me again, alert but watchful, glancing toward the hallway every few seconds. It was like he was telling me, without words, that something had shifted. That something was happening right under my nose. And somehow, in that moment, I understood that my life, the safe, familiar life I thought I had, was quietly unraveling. I spent the rest of that night staring at the hallway, watching Max, listening. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind against the window, felt like it held a secret. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think straight. All I could do was watch and wait, and wonder, how long had this been happening? And more importantly, what else was he hiding? The next morning, the house felt the same as ever. Sunlight spilling through the curtains, coffee brewing, the sound of distant traffic. But I knew it wasn't the same. That night had changed something. I couldn't ignore Max's warning, couldn't ignore the tiny shifts in my husband's routine, couldn't ignore the creeping suspicion in my chest. Something had shifted, and the quiet house, the loyal dog, the empty hallway, they were all trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. I couldn't stop thinking about that night. Max, standing in the hallway, growling at something I couldn't see. The way he wouldn't move from that guest room door. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his intense stare, felt the weight of that silence pressing down on me. And every time I tried to push it away, to convince myself I was overreacting, that nothing was wrong, the knot in my chest grew tighter. I kept asking myself, should I check? Should I open that door, finally see what he's been sensing all along? My hands would tremble just thinking about it. Part of me wanted to ignore it entirely, to pretend everything was normal, to bury the suspicion deep where it couldn't hurt me. But another part of me, the part that Max seemed to be speaking to, was desperate to know the truth. It wasn't just about the dog, though. It was about him. My husband. The man I trusted, the man I shared this house, this life with. And yet, he was gone so often. Work, meetings, late nights. Always some excuse. And when he was home, it wasn't the same. His eyes would glaze over, distracted. His touch, distant, perfunctory. I'd brush it off at first, tell myself it was stress, work, exhaustion. But deep down, a voice whispered, something is happening when I'm not looking. And I hated myself for noticing it. For feeling that gnawing suspicion. For allowing the fear of betrayal to creep in and take root. I wanted to trust him, to believe in the life we built together, but the cracks were too visible now. They were screaming at me in the quiet of the empty house, in the way Max refused to leave the hallway, in the subtle changes in the air I couldn't name. I found myself pacing the living room at odd hours, listening. Imagining scenarios that made my stomach churn. Was it another woman? Someone he'd been seeing for weeks, months? Or was it something smaller, something I couldn't quite articulate? And then I'd feel a pang of guilt, for thinking this way, for doubting him, for letting my imagination run wild. But I couldn't stop. The questions clung to me like a second skin. Every small sound became magnified, the squeak of a floorboard, the faint rustle of sheets, the whisper of wind through the cracks in the window. I'd look at Max, sitting like a sentinel, and wonder if he was trying to tell me the truth. Or warning me to turn back, to protect myself from something I wasn't ready to face. And there was another part of me that felt almost shamefully guilty for even being curious. Part of me wanted to look because I needed to see, to confront the reality I was too scared to speak aloud. Another part of me wanted to turn away, to preserve the fragile illusion that my marriage was intact. I was torn between knowing and not knowing. Between fear and desire. Between moral obligation and the selfish need to uncover the truth. I kept replaying the mornings and evenings, the subtle shifts in his tone, the way he'd brush past me to grab his keys, the quiet sighs I'd hear when he thought I wasn't listening. And I started noticing my own reactions. The small resentment I'd buried, the loneliness that had grown into a dull ache, the longing for attention that he no longer seemed capable of giving. My mind spun in circles. Guilt. Fear. anger, curiosity, desire. And Max, he was in the middle of it all. Silent, unwavering, almost prophetic. Watching. Waiting. And with every night that passed, every quiet hour spent wondering, I felt the invisible thread tightening, pulling me closer to something I wasn't sure I could handle. I knew one thing, something had changed in our home, in our lives. Something that couldn't be ignored any longer. And Max, my loyal, protective boy, was the only one brave enough to face it head-on. I wasn't ready to follow him, not yet. But I knew, deep down, that one night, I would have to. And when that night came, everything would change. The nights after that first unsettling encounter became unbearable. Max's behavior grew more intense, almost frantic. He no longer just waited by the hallway, he followed me everywhere in the house, pacing alongside my every step, his nails clicking against the hardwood floors, low growls rumbling in his throat at things I couldn't see. Sometimes he would stop abruptly, ears pointed, growling at the shadows in the living room. Sometimes he'd stare at me as if saying, "Do you see this? Do you feel it too?" I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe I'd become overly sensitive, too aware of every sound, every creak. But then the small things began to pile up, impossible to ignore. A photo frame on the shelf shifted slightly, though I knew I hadn't touched it. A scarf, my husband's, one he hadn't worn in months, was folded differently on the chair. A faint, sweet perfume lingered in the air when the house was empty, and I could swear it wasn't mine. I couldn't sleep anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, Max would stir, alert to some invisible presence. I could hear him pacing in the hallway, scratching lightly at doors, nudging at them insistently. My curiosity fought with my fear. I wanted to see, to confront whatever was happening. But I was terrified. Terrified of what I might find, terrified of confirming my worst suspicions, terrified of shattering the fragile illusion I had built for myself. And yet, I couldn't ignore it. One night, I stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at the guest room door. Max sat in front of it, hackles raised, growling softly, his body tense like a coiled spring. I leaned closer, trying to catch the faintest sound, when suddenly, a shadow moved across the hallway. Just a flicker, barely perceptible, but enough to make my stomach flip. My heart hammered in my chest, my hands clammy, my breath shallow. I froze, eyes darting, ears straining, but the shadow was gone before I could fully understand it. My first instinct was to call out, but the silence that followed made me pause. It wasn't just emptiness, I could feel the house holding its breath, waiting. Max growled again, low and warning, and nudged me toward the hallway. I wanted to follow him. Part of me desperately wanted to see, to uncover the truth. But another part of me, the rational, scared part, screamed at me to stay put, to ignore the signs, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. I hesitated, torn, frozen in place, my mind spinning. What am I even looking for? I wondered. Another woman? A betrayal? Or is it just my imagination, my insecurities manifesting in a dog's restless energy? But deep down, I knew it wasn't my imagination. Max wasn't just acting out of routine. He had never been like this before, never this persistent, never this intense. His growls, his pacing, the way he would block me from certain rooms, he was trying to tell me something. Something I didn't want to hear, but needed to know. The tension in the house became unbearable. Every sound was amplified, the whisper of the wind against the windows, the soft creak of the floorboards, the faint rustle of sheets in the guest room. My own footsteps seemed to echo in the hallway, but Max was always one step ahead, watching, alert. And with every passing night, my anxiety grew, my heart constantly in my throat, my mind spinning with possibilities, none of them comforting. Then, one night, the moment came. I heard it first, a quiet, deliberate shuffle, soft enough that it could have been my imagination, but too distinct to ignore. I froze, Max immediately at my side, growling, bristling, staring at the guest room door like it was the source of every secret in the world. My pulse was racing, my hands shaking, but I stepped toward the door, straining to see. A shadow flickered across the hallway, moving quickly, too fast for me to track. It vanished almost instantly, leaving only silence, and Max, standing rigid, staring into the emptiness as if daring it to return. My stomach twisted in knots. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. Someone was there, I realized. Or at least, someone had been. And Max saw it. I stepped back, unsure whether to run, hide, or confront it. My curiosity was a roaring fire inside me, clashing with a fear so primal it made my hands numb. That night, for the first time, I understood that whatever was happening in my house was bigger than I could have imagined. And Max, he was the only one brave enough to face it head-on. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. Max had been pacing, growling, and staring at the guest room door for hours. I felt every hair on my arm stand on end, every nerve in my body screaming that something was about to happen. I had avoided the door for days, weeks even, telling myself that maybe I was imagining things. But Max, he wouldn't lie. He never had. I finally gathered the courage to move toward the door. My hands were trembling so badly that I could barely twist the doorknob. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to open it. Max sat stiffly by my side, growling low, the sound vibrating in my chest. His eyes never left the shadowed corner of the room. And then I saw it. A scarf, folded neatly but unmistakably foreign, too soft, too sweet-smelling, not his, not mine. A faint perfume lingering in the air, delicate and sharp at the same time, a scent that instantly turned my stomach into ice. My heart lurched. My pulse raced. And then my eyes landed on my phone, lying on the bed as if dropped in haste, my husband's phone. Open. Messages glowing on the screen. Names, words, laughter, plans, all messages between him and someone else. Someone he shouldn't have been talking to. Someone who wasn't me. Max let out a low growl, a warning that felt almost human, and I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. My hands shook violently, cold sweat forming at my temples. I wanted to look away, to leave, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but something inside me refused. I had to see it all. I picked up the phone with shaking hands, scrolling through messages I wished I could unsee. Names I didn't recognize, plans that excluded me, words that should never have been written. Each new line cut deeper than the last. My vision blurred with tears I didn't notice falling, and Max pressed closer, growling, standing guard as if he was ready to attack anything that dared move in that room. And then it hit me, everything had been there all along. The subtle excuses, the late nights, the distant smiles, the perfume I sometimes thought I imagined. Max had been trying to tell me. He had been my silent sentinel, the only one brave enough to see the truth while I waited through denial. I dropped the phone onto the bed, my hands covering my face. I felt my chest heaving with sobs, rage, heartbreak, and disbelief all mixed together. My mind screamed, asking the questions I didn't want answers to. How long? How could he do this? Was I not enough? And through it all, Max stayed close, eyes sharp, growling softly, as if saying, "You see now. You know now." The room seemed to spin around me, the dim light from the hallway casting shadows that looked almost accusatory. Every sound in the house, every creak, every hum of the refrigerator, felt like it was echoing the betrayal. I didn't know whether to confront him, leave, or collapse on the floor and never get up. The only thing I knew for sure was that the world I had trusted, the life I had believed in, had changed forever. And yet, there was still a part of me that hesitated. A part that wondered whether this was all my imagination, whether Max had been overreacting, or whether my own eyes had finally opened to something that had been quietly unfolding in plain sight. That ambiguity, that unknowing, was almost worse than the truth itself. I sank to the floor beside Max, burying my face in his fur, feeling the betrayal as a physical ache. I didn't know what the next step was. I didn't know if I had the strength to face him, to demand answers, or to even breathe without thinking about the shadow of her in my home. But I did know one thing, nothing would ever be the same again. And if you think this is just a story, just wait, because the truth has layers, and the twists are far from over. Don't miss them. Subscribe to Stories by TE to stay with me through every shocking moment. The next morning, I went through the motions like nothing had happened. Breakfast on the table, coffee brewing, the smell of toast filling the kitchen, but every sound, every movement felt foreign. My hands trembled slightly as I poured the coffee, my mind replaying the messages, the scarf, the faint perfume that had made my stomach turn. Max sat at my feet, alert as ever, eyes following me, growling softly every time my husband moved closer. He didn't notice at first. He sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, completely unaware that my entire world had shifted overnight. I forced a smile, a polite nod, pretending like the air between us wasn't thick with tension. "Morning," I said softly, my voice quieter than usual. "Morning," he replied, glancing up briefly, distracted, already returning to his screen. I felt a pang in my chest. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to let him feel the weight of what I had discovered. But I didn't. Instead, I sipped my coffee, keeping my gaze low, pretending that nothing had happened. Max, however, did not pretend. He paced near the table, ears twitching, eyes sharp, growling low whenever my husband shifted in his seat. It was as if he were silently keeping score, silently reminding me that the betrayal was real, and that it wasn't going away just because we were all pretending. I noticed the small changes immediately. The way my husband avoided eye contact, laughed a little too quickly at something I said, ran his hand through his hair nervously. His energy was off, slightly rigid, slightly defensive, but he was trying to act normal. And me? I couldn't decide if I wanted to confront him or just slip out of the house and never come back. The thought of the confrontation made my chest tighten, but so did the thought of ignoring it. "Nothing happened, right?" I asked quietly, testing the waters, my voice trembling slightly despite my efforts to stay composed. "Of course not," he said, a little too quickly, almost too rehearsed. He avoided my gaze, eyes darting toward Max, who was watching him like a hawk. I didn't respond. I just sipped my coffee, the bitter liquid doing nothing to mask the sourness settling in my stomach. Max sat down at my feet, leaning against me as if saying, "I know. I saw. I told you." The rest of the day passed in a blur of silence and half-smiles. I noticed things I hadn't before, small items moved, subtle scents lingering in the air, the faint tension in the rooms themselves. The house felt different, heavier somehow, like it was carrying the secret in its walls. Max never left my side, shadowing me from room to room, growling softly whenever my husband approached. Even in mundane moments, folding laundry, washing dishes, or glancing out the window, I could feel the shift in the household. The invisible cracks in our marriage had widened overnight, and I realized there was no going back to the way things were. The trust had been broken, and though words hadn't been exchanged, the air between us was charged with the unsaid. That night, Max slept at the foot of the bed, alert, listening, guarding. My husband drifted into sleep beside me, unaware of the silent witness that now carried the truth between us. And I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I would do next, knowing that the world I thought I knew had changed forever. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the house silent except for the occasional creak and Max's steady breathing at my feet. My mind wouldn't stop racing. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, they all collided in a storm inside me. How could he do this? How could the person I trusted, the person I let into every corner of my life, betray me so completely? And yet, a small, stubborn part of me couldn't entirely hate him. I kept thinking about Max. My loyal boy, who had known before I did. Who had been the first to sense the cracks I refused to see. Was he just a protector? A guardian? Or something more, an omen, warning me of what I was too blind to notice? I reached down and ran my hand through his fur. His eyes met mine, steady, knowing, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. He had been there, observing, judging, waiting, and somehow, he had understood the truth long before I did. And then the question started, what should I do now? confront him? Demand answers, force the betrayal into the open? Or retreat, escape, leave everything behind and reclaim my peace while I still could? Could I forgive him, or even myself, for staying in a house where trust no longer existed? The options circled in my mind like vultures over a wound I couldn't stop bleeding from. Guilt gnawed at me too. Guilty for feeling so lonely, guilty for wanting more than he gave me, guilty for even allowing curiosity to lead me to this knowledge. But anger was louder. Anger at the lies, the sneaky smiles, the whispered excuses. And fear of what might happen if I confronted him, fear of the unknown, fear of losing the life I thought I had built. And still, I couldn't stop thinking about Max. That growl, that watchful stare, the way he had positioned himself in the hallway night after night, like a sentinel at the gates of truth. Maybe he was the only one who could navigate the gray areas of this household, the only one who knew the depth of the betrayal without needing words. And maybe, just maybe, he was silently telling me that some truths could be faced, but only when I was ready. I closed my eyes, imagining the conversation I might have with him, the questions, the accusations, the raw, shaking voice that would spill everything I had been holding inside. But there was a part of me that hesitated. Maybe some truths were too heavy to confront head-on. Maybe the gray areas, the moral dilemmas, the unspoken emotions, the tension between love, loyalty, and self-preservation, were where the real story lived. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight settle, and I looked at Max again. His eyes were steady, patient, unwavering. "What would you do if you were in my shoes?" I whispered to him, though I knew he couldn't answer. And yet, just looking at him, I felt a small spark of clarity. Whatever I chose, whatever path I walked next, it would have to honor my own strength, my own survival, and my own sense of truth. The house remained quiet, the shadows lingering in the corners, the air heavy with unspoken words. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know if I would confront him tonight, tomorrow, or never. But I knew one thing: I had seen the truth, and nothing could unsee it. And Max would be there, watching, waiting, a silent witness to the choices I would make. I have to ask you something, because I know I'm not the only one who's ever felt this way. Have you ever noticed strange behavior in your pets, little things that didn't make sense at first, moments when they seemed to see or sense something you couldn't? Maybe it was a dog staring at a corner of the room, or a cat pacing by a door, refusing to settle down. Maybe it was more than coincidence, maybe it was them trying to tell you something, warning you, or even protecting you in ways you didn't understand at the time. And what about secrets? The kind that hide behind closed doors, the ones that whisper quietly while the world keeps spinning, pretending everything is fine? Have you ever caught a glimpse of something you weren't supposed to see, or felt the tension in the air that something just wasn't right? I want to hear your thoughts. How would you handle a situation like this? Would you confront the truth head-on, or wait and see, letting the shadows linger? Have you ever felt your pet was trying to guide you, to warn you about something you weren't ready to face? Share your experiences, your thoughts, your advice in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories might help someone else who's going through the same thing. And if you don't want to miss more stories that uncover the hidden corners of life, the secrets behind closed doors, and the moments that make your heart race with suspense, make sure you subscribe to Stories by TE. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next gripping story, one that will keep you on the edge of your seat from start to finish. Because sometimes, the truth is closer than you think, and sometimes, the most loyal observer in your home might be watching it all unfold.